So my people have been around these parts for a while. 1770s on my father's side, Albert County for my mother's for at least late 1600s. So how did I end up doing all this stuff overseas? Well, it's very simple. That's how far Albert County boys have to go to find work. I didn't want to go to Fort Mac and have no great love of Alberta. So what are you going to do, right? So I led a life of misspent youth, doing stuff overseas, basically fighting corruption. Then I came back and I bought my place out in Albert County in 2006. And then started to get very interested in what was actually going on around these parts. Right? So the more you look into it, the more you dig into it, the more mysterious it becomes. And you know, New Brunswick is an amazing place. When Charles Theriault and I started to do the Great Resource Giveaway a couple of years ago, I did my first presentation in Moncton called New Brunswickistan, comparing New Brunswick to Tajikistan. And it's pretty close. One family runs the show. All the profits are taken out, sent away. Right? So this is actually how things work, and it's really not that different. That's the one thing that I've learned working all over the world. Corruption is the same no matter where you go, and how politicians act is pretty much the same.
Yes.
Carolyn is my lovely assistant and sidekick on the stop spraying stuff. So what is corruption? It's a misuse of entrusted power. It's a classic definition of it. Everybody gets excited about the bribery stuff, and when they think about corruption, they think about bribery. But it's actually much more than that, right? There's a lot of different forms. And what we see here in New Brunswick really isn't that much straight up bribery. Whether it be through lack of imagination or simply they don't know where to stash the money, it's under the bed is full or whatever, there just really isn't much actual cash payments done in. But what you do have is all the other forms, right? Nepotism. Do we have nepotism in New Brunswick? Yeah? Yeah, good old Dominic LeBlanc gives away the great surf clam contracts out to companies. Oh, just accidentally headed by the wife's cousin or nephew, whatever it was. He said, yeah, coincidence. What's wrong with that? Good family values. Us guys on the shore, we like to have family values. Right? And you look at time after time, what you see is people related to those in power, those that benefit. Right? Oops. The guy who becomes the Minister of Natural Resources was previously caught pilfering wood from Crown land. Right? Political family for a long time. Those Harveys, they've been around here for a long while. Right? So we see case after case of this stuff. Patronage. Do we have patronage here at home? Yeah? No, none of that stuff. No patronage, that's for sure, right? Nobody in somebody else's pocket or handing out things to their friends, right? Can you find out how contracts are awarded? No, absolute secrecy. So you have to actually physically fill in an application to an outfit in Fredericton to get on the list of people that are allowed to look at how contracts are awarded. Okay, if you're a company, right, then you can look at actually what procurements have gone on and who it's been awarded to, but you still have to pay, right, for every single transaction. This doesn't happen in the rest of the world. I'm telling you, in Ukraine, they have an e-governance system, an e-procurement system that I can go online, see who was awarded, who bid on it, how many companies bid. It's not that there isn't corruption, but at least you can find out the facts. Right? Fraud, well, we have a few cases of fraud in this province. Most recently, the great Francophonie Games scandal. So, okay, we're going to bid 11 million, but we know that it's, whatever, 145 million, and, oops, somebody from Ottawa didn't tell us how to fill in the form. That's the excuse. Would that stand up in court if you went in and said, I'm sorry, I'm going to not pay you $100 million less for that vehicle than I promised I would. Right? So if you went into an auction and you actually bid less than you know that the actual prices and stuff, it's straight up fraud. And if this was any commercial deal, you could relatively show it in court. Theft of public resources. Do we have that?
It's not theft if you give it away.
Yeah. No, we actually, well, we pay them to take it off our hands. Please, take our wood, take our tungsten, take our shale gas, take everything. We'll actually pay you to take it off our hands. Yeah, I guess it's not theft if you pay the thief to take it off your hands, right? That's kind of strange to get. Right? Political party financing, well, not really that big of an issue. You know, old Dominic Carty wants to take money from Jamie Irving. At least it's relatively transparent, except for all those numbered companies. And so when you go through the list of BC and Liberal Party contributors, there's whole pages of numbered companies that you don't actually know who it is when it's giving the money. So
You can't do that anymore. I don't think you can do that anymore.
you can't. Still can. Under the regulation, still can. The war chests are already free. So what is the point of changing the rules? You know, and this is what they've been doing. They change the rules after the election or once the war chest is already free. So the Liberals went in and said, okay, we're going to tinker with this. But still it exists and still, you know, the war chest, the money is still there. It's not like they gave it back, right? So when Alan McEachern in Nova Scotia got caught for this sort of thing, he actually had to give back $2 million. Collusion and anti-competitive behavior, and what that is where it's unfair. So when people start to say, well, you know, those big corporations that we have in New Brunswick, boy, they bring the jobs, don't they? Right? But they don't. That is not being pro-business when the business that you're in is putting other businesses out of business. Right? That's actually the opposite of being pro-business. So what we have is monopolies that are anti-competitive and make sure that no little guy is going to be able to get anything in the province. And then finally, conflict of interest. And boy, do I love telling stories from New Brunswick when I go overseas. I was just in Kosovo training the internal affairs guys, and I explained to them about our great case of Donny Arsenault. And they really can't believe it. Same thing in Ukraine. Ukrainians said, hey, don't say that. We think you're the good guys. When they actually find out what the Minister of Labor had an under-the-table job for a union where he was getting paid, and it's not a conflict of interest. Sorry, folks, that is far below any level of transparency or accountability. Right? This is a banana republic without the bananas. And that's where we're stuck. The problem is that, for example, with conflicts of interest, people just do not understand. Or they do understand and they just don't mind it. But those conflicts of interest go through every single sector. Right? And we see this.
It all goes back to nepotism.
A little bit, but in some cases it's quite undue influence. I'll touch on this. Get the next one, Carol. Right, that look familiar? That look like New Brunswick?
Yeah.
Good to have friends, huh? Yeah. I was actually from Azerbaijan. We had a contest and some school kids to draw and stuff. And boy, I just love that picture because I use it in almost all my presentations. I'm trying to explain. What we have is a situation where there's very few people running the show and everybody is in everybody's pocket. The conflicts that exist across the political system are staggering. Doesn't matter what party you're in. Right? As long as you're in the trough, that's all that matters. Right? So getting in the trough is the game. That's the only reason why we have elections. So people can regularly push the other piggies out and get their snouts into the trough. Right? Sometimes you'll flip parties. Sometimes you'll destroy parties, take over other parties. You know, you can do pretty much anything. So obviously, political viewpoints really don't matter in the province. There's so much party flipping going on across that legislature. It's no wonder that they all get along well. Because you don't know whose party you're going to be in tomorrow. Right? You can be a socialist one day and a conservative the next. It's unbelievable. Yeah, so corruption has 3 levels. You have grand or political corruption that exists everywhere. Now, I spent last year, it was November, started to get down to about -10 at night, and the Qataris asked me if I would come and join their anti-corruption agency. Plus 25, -10, okay, there we go. Packed our bags, we're off, and the boy loved it because he could get a chance to swim in the ocean, and so he enjoyed his time in Qatar. And I was the head of the transparency department in the Qatari anti-corruption agency. Needless to say, I had a lot of time to work on my New Brunswick stuff and watch YouTube videos. But there are 300,000 people in the richest country in the world. Yeah. Qataris are the richest people on the planet. Yeah. It's like double the size of PEI with so much natural gas wealth and oil wealth that they would never be able to spend. All my colleagues came to work in Bentleys and everything else, and they had legitimately bought, right? One guy had a Rolls Royce. So needless to say, I was the poorest guy in the office. And you come in and you see that there's no corruption that exists on the administrative level because there's no need. Why are you going to steal money when you got so much money? Do they have it at the political level? Oh yes. Boy, do they like to bribe. Right? Not only do they like to bribe people, they also are all involved in sort of their side deals where ministers own companies that they then benefit off of what decisions that they make. So grand corruption exists everywhere. It's not a place on the planet that doesn't exist. There's no real justification for it. So this, as we like to call it, need versus greed. Administrative corruption is if you're not paying people well enough. Right? A lot of countries, doctors not paid, teachers not paid, and everything else. People are going to look for other ways to get fees. So in Ukraine, when people go to the hospital, they know they're going to pay. Like there's a Kurt McDonald, the Brunswick is currently hanging around in Ukraine, and I had some funny exchanges with him because, of course, his wife's a doctor, and he just doesn't realize how deep the corruption system actually is. But everybody is willing to pay a fee to get access to services. Right? We get gouged at SMB because SMB can gouge us. Right? We wouldn't think of slipping the guy $50 to make it cheaper to get your driver's license or wherever else, right? We don't think about those things. So this need base also doesn't really exist here. But what we do have is this grand political corruption. And then you have state capture, where businesses basically write the rules, or regulatory capture, write the rules for how they do business. Right? So when people talk about red tape here, say, oh, we need less regulation. No, we actually need some regulation because we don't have any in terms of all the big businesses. If you want to get into forestry, there's only one group that writes the rules for the forestry, right? And that's how it runs. So what we have is a system in which private individuals are deciding what government policy should be. What does the government actually do? Right? Well, they nickel and dime the rest of us to death. Right? They're always looking how to somehow. I love the property tax thing too. All right, we need a money grab, quick. How can we do it? Well, we can't do like in Tajikistan where they just grab people off the street and then hold them prisoner until they cough up the money. So let's just change all the property taxes with no justification. Because nobody's going to know. Well, people do because they see the property tax. So the great, grabs. And the same thing, had a lot of fights in social media about the carbon tax, and it's very simple. The carbon tax in this province will never go towards renewable energy or anything else. It's simply a money grab. And it will be used and wasted and whatever else, and will not do anything to improve a terrible situation with climate change. Right? So corruption around the world is seen as abuse of authority. But what's interesting is, when you start to go out and talk to people in Africa, Asia, wherever, it's always the same thing. Corruption is abuse of authority unless I'm a beneficiary to it.
Yeah.
If I'm in on it, it's something else. And when I first started talking about this, people said, oh, we don't have corruption in Brunswick. What the hell are you talking about? You're crazy. Charles Theriault and I were nutters for trying to show the great resource giveaway. Right? But when you dig into this, you realize how deep it goes, and how many people are beneficiaries to this, right? If you own a construction company and you're paying off your Liberal candidate, or you own another business and you're paying off Conservative guys, that's who you want to win because you're going to be a beneficiary to it. So when it comes to things like shale gas, as soon as people think that they're going to be a beneficiary to it, that there's something in it for them, that they don't see it quite the same way. Right? And I've noted this about political parties, and this is why I stay nonpartisan, because nothing changes. And the fact is, at the end of the day, corruption is the same no matter what party is going to be in there. It's going to take the same forms, it's going to look the same way, the same patronage. Right? That was the gold rule. I was down giving an interview in Halifax at CBC. Don Connolly's mayor Mashir. He said, yeah, when I was growing up, it was very clear. Next government comes in, everybody in the government offices would clean out their desks because that was the deal. See you in 8 years, that was the deal. You had 8 years to earn, it's almost biblical. 7 lean years and 7 fat years, I guess. But, with the election cycle, you're always going to have at least 2 governments. Right? So that was the deal. And people understood this, that this was how it was going to work. Is that no matter who's in power, they're going to be passing out patronage. And the patronage schemes here are endless, right? So it's my guys are not the corrupt ones, right? So, obviously Trudeau is an evil genius who's responsible for all the evils of Canada if you talk to anybody on the BC side. When Harper was in, it was the same thing. Harper was just the Antichrist. Everything he done was terrible and whatever else. And, this partisan view of the world, the only corrupt guys are the guys on the other side of the aisle. But they're all buddies, right? Go sit in the Ottawa airport and watch for the flights to come back to the Maritimes. It doesn't matter what they are, Liberal or BC. Even Elizabeth May is buddies with Bernier these days because they're both sticking it to the government. So there is no real animosity at that level, right? That's why you have all these party flippers in the Brunswick, because they understand power and access to power and access to the trough is the only thing that matters. So what do? Well, the laws in Canada back in late 1800s, early 1900s, were all about undue advantage. That nobody should have an undue advantage before the law or be able to use their position to help their friends. No company should have an undue advantage. Along the way, we changed our legislation and we ended up with parts of the criminal code that look at corruption. Extremely difficult to prove. We have the lowest rate of convictions in the developed nations, in the OECD. Lowest rate of convictions. Might get a few more next week. We'll see how the old S&C level thing goes. S&C is a favorite topic of mine because I've been following the case for years. So back when it broke, back in 2013, 2014, when the guy at the McGill University Health Center, Arthur Porter, a Sierra Leonean, who got a Canadian passport, he had an American passport before that, but oops, got prosecuted for corruption in Detroit, working at the university, had to make a run for it. What does he do? Goes to Canada, gets into Montreal, picks up a Canadian passport. Prime Minister appoints him as head of oversight for CSIS. Oops! What? Conviction? There's no stinking conviction. Right? So Sierra Leone again. Now I worked in the Sierra Leone Anti-Corruption Commission, so my buddies called me up and they said, what the hell is wrong with you people? We wouldn't give that guy a job. Why would you guys give him a job? So he was the one who passed out $20 million to S&C Lavalin for work they could not prove that they actually did. Nothing to show for it. $20 million. Pretty good. On top of that, he was making deals with Israeli arms dealers and the Russians in Africa. That's good. So the head of the guy who has the key to all our secrets is for rent. So this is how the S&C Lavalin thing started. Also, we used probably contacts between the Gaddafi regime and S&C Lavalin, and also the stuff they did in Algeria. So this has been going on for a very long time. Nothing new, right? Both cons and the libs, both in on it, both part of the deal, both wanting to protect S&C Lavalin, their guys, who contribute to both parties in a major way. Right? Trying to prove that, in terms of breach of trust. So commits fraud or breach of trust is guilty of an indictable offense, right? Yeah. Try and prove that in court. And the problem is you have to show malfeasance. You have to show that they were up to something bad. They can always claim that they were stupid. And that's a standard Canadian defense. I didn't know. Downey Arsenault, why are you taking 2 jobs? Nobody said I couldn't. So that's it. Great. You didn't know. Or the rules don't apply. Or there is no law against that. Right? So the problem that we have is that as long as you can plead ignorance, or you didn't know, you're going to be able to wiggle your way out. And it's not just us. Sweden's just going through a very important case at the moment involving Uzbekistan and the bribery of foreign officials. And so the S&C level and stuff goes back to also our Corrupt Foreign Public Officials Act. It's only been actually court cases against them, S&C Lavalin, and another one called n.g.o Resources out of Calgary. And the only reason why the n.g.o case happened is because my buddies in the Bangladeshi Anti-Corruption Commission forced the Canadian government to look on it. Basically, they paid off a minister. And this was guys who were sitting out of Parliament, showed up with their service passports, basically sitting with a diplomatic passport, showed up to Bangladesh and were brokering deals. So it's only been used very selectively. Breach of trust, the same thing, very hard to prove in court. Nobody's going to really do hard time in Canada for corruption offenses, and they know it. Right? So this is what we constantly see happening. Here? So, who do we have on the watchdog side? Who is watching the bad guys? Well, pretty slim, right? We have the Public Sector Integrity Commission, which is supposed to protect whistleblowers. Look at poor Mark Norman up there in Ottawa. He was actually a whistleblower, but he's not covered under this because he didn't follow the chain of command, which was you tell your boss that they're doing bad things first. Yeah. How well does that usually work for you? Yeah. And so in the case of Mark Norman, the government was doing a massive cover-up, destroying access to information requests, things like that. Access to information, like I said, the most opaque place on the planet. And the great irony was, the guy who was actually repressing a whistleblower in Canada, the head of our Treasury Board, Scott Bryson, was the co-chair of the Open Government Partnership around the world. And I got in trouble because every time he'd show up on Twitter promoting this, I'd say, Mr. Bryson, can you please ask the ask the Nigerians if they could help us reach the level of transparency that they have, or the Azerbaijanis or somebody else. Maybe you can get some technical assistance to come in from Africa to help us become more transparent. Because the way it is in Canada, we are one of the most opaque places around. My sidekick and the Vice President of Impact, Joe Baxter, who's stirred up a lot of trouble in Nova Scotia, recently put in an access to information request, and they said, okay, the fee is going to be $4,200. They're not going to deny your access to information, but if you're going to kick up $4,000, well, there we go. Yeah. Doesn't sound exactly very transparent, does it?
It's like an anti-bribe.
Yeah.
They do the opposite in Brunswick. I did an access to information request, and I was just snowballed with information, but none of the information I actually asked.
Yeah, that's one of the ways to do
And it's
it.
given to me on the 11th hour of a public meeting.
Yeah. Now, the good news is, I had a little chat with our Integrity Commissioner yesterday. And I told him that what I'd like to do is to do an assessment of the integrity system, and he was all on board. So kudos to Charles Murphy, because he's one of the few people that come up. His predecessor, who I also approached with the same way, he said, look, I'm a guy who's written conflicts of interest laws, and I don't know how many countries you want to rewrite yours. I could probably help you if you're interested. Would you like to meet? And he said, no, I can't meet with you. It's too early in my administration. Well, a year later, it was too late in his administration because he was out the door. So our Integrity Commissioner at least takes this somewhat seriously. He understands the dangers that we have in New Brunswick. Is that if there is no trust in government, things are going to get very ugly. And we already see this. Excellent. Yeah. So until the Charbonneau Commission, nothing was really done in terms of anti-corruption stuff. We get excited about abuse of authority here. Boy, that Trudeau guy's a bad guy. Oh, that Harper guy's a bad guy. Oh, that Duffy. Right? It's all individualized things, that they're all bad apples. Right? But we don't look at the collusion between major corporations and the government. The issue about the shipbuilding contract was undue influence of one company over the entire military procurement system. One guy decided to blow the whistle, he's on trial. Right? And so, how does this work? Oops, by the way, those new Coast Guard boats that we just bought that roll in a heavy dew, awesome. And are we going to be held to account for that? Something deep in our procurement system. And the undue influence that we have, and this is what it is. That's why I say, what I love about New Brunswick politicians is that they will not be undersold. You don't have to pay me any money. I'll sell out my province for nothing. Give me a handshake and maybe a fancy meal, right? And I'll be willing to sell out my province. So there's no real enforcement, very little understanding that the problem that we have cuts across all governments, and that there's a need to clean up the system. If we don't, where are we? Can New Brunswick afford the level of corruption that we currently have? Yeah. Do you really think we're off the hook for the Francophonie Games?
No.
We bid on something, we won the bid. Guess what? You go and bid on a car and you accept that you're going to pay the car. You're not walking out of that without paying anything. Just that simple. The level of patronage on everything. Sultan contracts, road building, every single aspect of it, time after time after time, is a loss for the province. Opportunities, New Brunswick. Right? Should be told, miss opportunities, New Brunswick. 300 million they give out, and they're not going to tell anybody where the money's going. Because you can't make me, says Lund. Now, Lund is a favorite guy of mine. He went to Nova Scotia, did the same job in Nova Scotia, did the same thing in Nova Scotia. When they demanded to know how many jobs he actually created, he got flustered and whatever else. His first act when he came in to Nova Scotia was to give out money to the former bank that he had worked mere months ago, Butterfield Bank, from Bermuda. Bermuda. It's funny how all those roads here lead back to Bermuda. It's like a Stan Rogers song or something. Our ships of state crash on the rocks of Bermuda. Right? London did the same thing. Got run out of town. Goes down to Bermuda again. After a while, the Bermudians are far too smart for his flim-flam stuff, and they sent him away after 6 months. And he said, oh, of course, it was family values. I wanted to spend more time with the family, and immediately took a new job in New Brunswick doing exactly the same thing. Will not be held to account, will not answer to the legislature, will not answer to any individual MLAs. He's just going to do whatever the heck he wants to do. And nobody is going to hold him accountable. And I think that's pretty much it. Hit the next one, that's going to come up 0. Oh no, what to do? Oh, I have answers this time. So what are we going to do? The real problem is the undue influence here in New Brunswick corporations. They're the ones that write the rules. This is where the great sins start. That and patronage. Right? Business should be doing business, and government should govern. That's it. Right? Business should not be governing. And that's what I said. It would be great if the government of New Brunswick actually started to govern, make policy, make decisions. Right? What are they concerned about? What was the big news today on Shift? Anybody catch it?
Social development.
No? Dominic Carty's going to shut down the Confucius Institute. That's our biggest problem. Well, he went out to dinner with Jamie Irving the other night. You'd think they might have some other issues to bring up with Jamie. Right? Maybe breaking up the press monopoly or something like that. He's going to put a stop to the Chinese. You have to increase transparency. Without transparency in our system and access to information, nothing goes anywhere. Citizens cannot take action. You have to establish a genuine free media. One corporation runs all the media. print media, most of the radio stations. What was interesting is, what's the bend called? What was it, 109? So when Irving bought the bend, they didn't buy the sister station in Nova Scotia. They only bought the New Brunswick operation to make sure that there was no real avenue for people to call in and start complaining. It doesn't make any business sense, because on a business model, you want to have more places where you can place ads, and you want to have both the Nova Scotia and New Brunswick markets where you can run your ads. On a business model, it doesn't make any sense. Very strange deal to me, unless you're trying to make sure that you monopolize everything. And you have to have civil society. Right? How many organizations in New Brunswick are chasing down corruption? You're looking at it. It's pretty sad. I can do this on a part-time basis because it's basically one of my volunteer activities. So between the stop spraying stuff and this, it eats up all of my free time, right? But nobody wants to tackle this stuff. Where's civil society? Where's the voices? Okay, you get some crazy people, a couple of tinfoil hatters that, between the Illuminati and the lizard people, they're all out against corruption. And then there's, Dave Amos and his relentless email writing campaign to put a stop to everybody in New Brunswick. Gotta love them. And I love all the nutters in New Brunswick because for some reason there's a higher concentration than anywhere in the world. But we don't know the reasons why. I personally blame the glyphosate. Carolyn disagrees with me on that. But you have a lot of crazy people, but very few people that are out there actually working on this, trying to expose what's going on. Right? So without a free media, without civil society, without a government that's interested in this, we're stuck at the moment. None of the political parties want to tackle this issue. None. And I can tell you, I've approached our two alternative parties multiple times and said, guess what? If you want help writing a policy and doing some serious work, let's do it in a public, open way, and I'm willing to sit and train your candidates how to talk about the corruption issue. Zero interest. Too early in their administrations, I guess. So I don't know. I mean, if none of the political parties want to tackle this, and you can tell the movement of Brunswickers are fed up. You guys happy with the corruption situation here? Yeah? You like how things are going? Things are going well? Yeah? So that's where we are. Here's some of the things that we could do. Right? So there is a chance to start to move things forward, but there has to be a critical mass of people. There has to be somebody on the political agenda who's willing to bring this up. I just do not see it. Same thing happened, very interesting. Before the 2014 election, got a call from the Liberal Party, said that they were going to do their transparency and accountability strategy. I said, great. You want some help with that? I got, 20 years experience, I can help you with that. Then they said, oh yeah, how much would you want? I said, I don't want anything. I don't want to be paid. But we do it in a public way. Yeah, we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
That was the last I heard of them.
Should have charged them more.
Right? So obviously, right? BC guys know me, they know my capabilities. So, but you just don't see a real interest of anybody at the political level to tackle this. Because how are they going to all benefit? Right? That's the problem. Without being able to engage in patronage, how do you make the political system work? And that's the number one problem that we have. The trough, that's all that New Brunswick is. It's just a huge trough where they're going to eat until there's nothing left in that trough, and then that's it. And that's no different than what happened in Russia, which you just stole everything possible and then sent the money out of the country. We do exactly the same thing. We can't tunnel out every asset in this province. Whatever resource or asset the province has is simply grabbed and sent out of the province down to the river. Right? So New Brunswick is not a poor place. It's a small place. It's a city, really, when you get down to it. So it shouldn't really cost that much to run health services and all the rest of it. So it should be booming. Right? We're sitting on tons of natural resources. But none of that goes to any benefit to the province. Every single deal ends up the same. Whether it be wind energy, or it's going to be shale gas, or anything else. Right? standard model, 1 to 4% royalty rate, which won't even cover the cost of the damage done when they're building. Even when they put in the wind turbine, same thing, you ripped up. Everything around process broke, right? What does the province get out of it? Nothing. No benefits.
Get a liability.
What's happened is the profit model is that of course that money is going into a private corporation that's out in Alberta, and the same thing with a very poor safety record and everything. What happens if there's a major incident? What's going to happen with the tungsten mine if there's a major incident? What's going to happen with the shale gas? Corridor will be shut up tomorrow, right? That's it. We'll just close up shop and run, and there's nobody going to be holding them accountable at the end of the day. Right? That's it. That's where we are. Province that's on the edge of bankruptcy, that refuses to deal even with a minimal level of normal governance in the province, and just take and take and take until there's nothing left. And then what do we have? Right? If the feds have to come in and bail us out, I'll tell you, there'll be a new regime in town. It'll be 10 who's sitting there, because of course we know that some federal governments are more fair to their New Brunswick friends than others. Depends on who's there.
What do you think anticipate happening if we go bankrupt in New Brunswick and the feds come along and say, okay, we're going to have to deal with that. We have to come up with a business plan essentially to straighten you out. What do you think they're going to say to Irving?
Well, we have this little thing called confederation. So when, for example, the feds proposed to have the Extractive Sector Transparency Measures Act, ESTMA, 2009, somebody from New Brunswick said, that's it, we'll secede from confederation if you try to make us transparent. Oh, if Irving had to start paying its fair share, do you think they'll be here tomorrow?
Yes.
No.
Because they have nowhere else to go.
They have plenty of places to go.
And if they do, fine. They won't be taking our money.
But they'll strip everything and they'll still have contracts and everything. So you
Well,
look
I
at
think
what...
we're better off getting rid of them.
Yeah, but you look at
rather than
Maine.
keeping them.
So back a couple of years ago, we couldn't get a story out about Irving anywhere. So I called up the Pine Tree Watchdog Network, which is investigative journalists in Maine. They were the ones who did the first negative story about Irving of all time. And I pitched it to them very simply. I said, what's happening in New Brunswick is going to happen in Maine, and it's already happening in Maine. And you know this. The lobbyists for Irving in the U.S. go back to the 90s. They had major lobby firms in Washington who were lobbying for them, both at the state and at the federal level in the U.S., right? So that was it, and then Bruce Livesey came up, and based on that, he did his series of articles and stuff. So the word started to get out. But at the end of the day, what are the feds going to do? They're going to force taxing Irving, maybe. Right? But look at what happened with the tariffs. So even the U.S. Department of Commerce came in and said, oh, you guys are subsidizing. This is just criminal what you're doing. You're subsidizing all of your woodlots. And Irving was the only ones who had a small percentage to pay. They paid 9%, everybody else pays 14 to 17%. Right? So, I don't know. And Irving has a lot of friends in Ottawa, if you haven't noticed. Boarding for ships. Even though they're not really good at building them, that doesn't matter. Right? So, I don't know. I mean, if that situation happens the first time in Canada, what would happen? We become then a territory? The same status as Northwest Territories? Awesome. They could never force amalgamation because the other provinces wouldn't go along with it, because then their piggies wouldn't get their snouts in the trough in Nova Scotia and PEI, which would make sense, right? Amalgamation. Never going to happen. So I don't know. I mean, it might be a very positive thing. It might be where they actually break up the monopolies in the province, force people to pay taxes, and then we go on to a healthier, happier future. But it's going to be extremely disruptive. What's it going to do to the credit rating of the province? Right? And so it's going to be very hard for the province to raise any money. And if we do go under some sort of trusteeship of the feds, which has never happened again, nobody really knows because the rules just aren't there. It's the same thing what happened to Detroit over there. Any other questions? Yeah?
Or do you?
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Ladies first. Sure.
So I hear different numbers, but I guess the speculation is that maybe with all these shell companies under Irving, that 1 in 12 people in the province would be employed by them, something like that. And so I'm curious, with your knowledge of working in other countries, have you seen systems where monopolies have been pushed out, and then how has that affected, like do other companies step in to fill that vacuum in, or is it just massive unemployment? Like what happens there?
Anytime you break up a monopoly, it's good for business. So what would happen tomorrow? All of those companies that would be broken up and they would start, and you would actually have more competition, which would employ more people, right? How is the province constantly ruled by this oligarchy? Because they say, if you touch us, the jobs get it, but it's the opposite. The jobs are gone anyways. So those that claim that somehow Irving has been beneficial to New Brunswick haven't looked at the finances of the province for the last 40, 50 years, because it's the exact opposite. That's it. Gerald, you must have some question. No?
Oh, yeah.
All right. All right. We got one in the back, and then we'll get to you. Yeah. Sorry, there was somebody here? Edward?
Oh,
Yeah.
just about, I guess, when it comes to monopolies and breaking up monopolies, like have you seen any, in any other countries, like socialization or nationalization of different monopolies or anything like that? So I think maybe recently on the CBC something came out about the fact that most of our, or maybe it was from the MBB co-op, most of Canada, almost all of our industries, not just here in New Brunswick, we live in monopoly or oligopoly situations. If you look at telecommunications, if you look at forestry, if you look at, the list goes on and on.
Yeah. Well, CBC and Media Co-op, kind of different.
I know, I can't remember which one.
Kettles of fish. No, it's just bad business. It's anti-competitive. Anytime you have a monopoly, and every business wants to be a monopoly. If McDonald's can put Burger King out of business, they are happy to do that.
Or price fix with.
Yeah, or in a collusive cartel situation. Absolutely. The only thing at the end of the day that benefits in a monopoly is allegedly that it streamlines sort of process, but we haven't seen that. We don't see any benefits in the province, right? Bigger Irving is not better business. It's not. It puts all the small businesses out, and they can put the screws to people because they have the economic leverage to do it. It's never been good anywhere where you've had monopolies or oligarchies. And if you look at the countries that did do this, like in places like Ukraine or Russia, it's always been bad for the people, and it's always been bad for the economies. And the World Bank shows this, is that the higher concentration of ownership, fewer companies, poorer that the country becomes. It's just that simple. You can actually bring up the math on this. Sir?
Well, I think she has a question.
It's all good.
Hey?
I was just going to ask, do you have examples of other countries or societies that have similar sort of situation as we do in New Brunswick, and how they've moved forward to a
Sure.
more positive outcome?
Sure. Called the robber barons in the 19th century, we had that. So New Brunswick is a case of back to the future. So I guess they took a bricklet and made it a time machine, and they went back in time and managed to dig up, Carnegie and the rest of them, robber barons, right? Same thing. So once in the U.S., you actually broke up these monopolies, and the justice system started to force competitive behavior among companies, then you get out of this solution. So we've done it. We've already done it in the 19th century. What we did is go back to this typical model. So mainly what you need to have is a functioning court system. And as long as the courts enforce competition rules, then that's one of the ways out. We don't have that here. Our anti-monopoly organization, FCNB, doesn't know its job, doesn't understand its job. They're putting up ads about chasing down fraud, but the real fraud is being committed by companies that are engaged in monopolies. So FCNB doesn't understand the security side at all. And what they've done is actually slowly strip away that function from FCNB, where they actually enforce the rules. Nobody's enforcing the rules in Brunswick. And there's nothing you can do because you can't go to the fence because it's a provincial issue.
So just to add on to that, so are there examples in other countries or where you have, how do you shift society's participation or gaze or focus to change that pressure in that direction?
Well, to understand it, I mean, you mobilize people. I mean, in Ukraine, we had a revolution in 2014 that was all about that, right? So what people started to do at the first, they had public lustration. They would grab public officials and throw them in the garbage cans. Or if they saw somebody on the street who they knew was connected with an oligarch, they would do exactly the same thing. Then the war broke out, and the oligarchs had their own private armies, and they reestablished control and stuff. But it was fantastic to watch in the early days where people said, I'm empowered now. I'm not going to put up with it anymore. They did try to do de-oligarchization in a short period in 2014, 2015, but it failed. I was there trying to set up the Anti-Corruption Bureau. So we set up the Anti-Corruption Bureau that was going to go after this. But already there was oligarchic influence there. So it's tough. It's not easy, but when people reach the point that enough is enough, then they will eventually stand up and start to make a demand. Yeah.
Will it become, do you think, Jack, do you think it will become an Haiti situation?
With an earthquake?
No, with I mean, the scenario right now.
Oh, the riots with the
riots.
corruption.
I mean, it's essentially the same scenario you're talking about.
Oh,
You're talking
okay.
about corruption.
Here's, I understand it's a snowy night, but,
Do you think things will actually come to some form of head?
I don't know. I mean, Charles Terra and I gave it a good run for it back in 2014. But even at our meetings, we get 50 people show up. So the level of passivity on this issue, and like I said, none of the major political parties are willing to confront this. So if you're not willing to confront this, how do you mobilize citizens? We can mobilize citizens, but it has to be much more. I have to be on the road, 600 days a year to go to every village in New Brunswick and do this. Just like Moses Cody and the Anti-Initiative movement did in the 20s. That's the only way, is to do direct reach out. Far more energetic civil society in Nova Scotia on some of these issues. Right? You get more people come, more people talking about. Look at the mill stuff that's going on right now in Pictou. Hundreds of people. Ellen Page is on Colbert talking about it. Carolyn was trying to find in New Brunswick Ellen Page. I don't know. It's
jealous.
Connolly, maybe. If you can get them out of the home for a while. I don't know. I mean, this is the problem, is that there isn't the leadership. And without the leadership, it's very difficult to mobilize society.
Just because we have a minority government now, we have 6 MLAs that are not from those 2 big parties. And I know you've said that it seems that no political party has shown interest. But if they were interested, could 6 MLAs, make a difference? They're still a minority.
Absolutely.
Because they could negotiate, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this was what my advice to both the Greens and the PA is don't worry about making deals to govern. Go kamikaze and just hammer away at the battleship all day. Because you're going to get far more people on board with that than you are trying to play games with the major political powers, who will give you access to power just a little bit, that would throw some crumbs your way. Okay, we'll change the Motor Vehicle Act. Is that the #1 problem in Brunswick? Oh, we don't have 2 license plates anymore. Oh, well, there we go. Job done. Right? Oh, we're going to increase the amount of money going into renewables. Well, there we go, job done. No, so I don't understand, really, to be quite frank, about why people wouldn't understand that this is an issue that will mobilize everybody in this country. Mobilize. People are fed up. Yeah.
Okay, what's your vision if we don't do nothing, just keep going with our eyes closed?
Bankruptcy.
Bankrupt.
How else? Look at the finances.
I know.
It's very, very simple numbers game.
Budget's
Giving
gonna be
away.
balanced at the end of the year.
What?
The budget's going to be balanced by the end of the year.
That's smoke and mirrors, right?
You've been smoking marijuana or you
No,
He's going to give us $14 billion.
yeah. So I mean, basically the budget is balanced in which they're not having more expenditures, but the fact is the amount of debt is still destroying the province. The province is getting older. The health costs are going to go up and whatever else. Right? And now that the Cardi is closing down the Confucius Institute, the Chinese will start making attacks on us and probably using economic weapons against New Brunswick.
They're using the people that they're teaching to speak it, probably. The one thing I really have wondered, and it's been one of my major concerns for a long, long time, when you say government governs, is there anywhere in the world that you know of where there is criteria in place for the persons that are put into the government? Because for the most part, what I see are not people that I really would want to be making grossly large decisions based on any number of directions that they seem to be going. And you're saying, good Lord, under what circumstance? I mean, either the people that are making the decisions are obviously not elected, people that seem to be doing the directing, and Jerry butt sweeping certainly seems to be creating quite a nightmare, and probably will create a difference in direction, I suspect environmentally, and I would imagine pipeline will go through now, because I suspect that was one of the things holding it up.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, in some countries, there is a minimal level of education, minimal level of gender participation and things like that, where people, but, you know, democracy is the way that it is, right? If we look at the provincial level, and look at the guys who sit in the legislature, it's basically, ooh, geez, I need a job, I'm going to go run for something. Right? Get my snout in the trough. And you ask people, I mean, how can you flip parties? How can you go from stating that you're a committed social democrat to joining the Tories the next week? Okay, let's give Hardy some credit. At least he's not anti-education as some of his predecessors have been. And there was a couple of ministers of education who said, yeah, I don't understand why we even have this portfolio, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's the situation that we're in, is that people prepared to write policy papers. And this is what I've kept saying, is that should have been the #1 training that all the new MLAs, there's a very low level of awareness, and you constantly see it on social media, about what it is the legislature's supposed to do. It's not a popularity contest. It's a place to make laws. So you should have a vague understanding of what the legislature is, what the legislature should do, right? It's a serious bit of work, right?
If you ask them a question on any given thing that they're legislating on currently, most of them just go duh.
Yeah.
Or, you know, maybe some other.
But that's what I said.
It's the only training they get. Not to answer a question.
So, I mean, you need people who understand portfolios, you need people that understand how the legislature works, you need people who understand how laws are written. I mean, if you are not prepared to draft laws before an election, again, I went to the alternative parties and said, guys, you want help on policy stuff, you want something to do something about corporate capture, let's do it. But roll up your sleeves, find please 3 guys who know what they're talking about, and then you can draft legislation, right? And so this is what we see, is that even the new parties are not prepared, and I said the same thing on Dennis Atchinson's show, is that the new parties are not prepared to do the job, which is draft legislation. If you're not prepared to do that, why?
Yeah.
They don't know how to do it.
Don't know how to do it, they're not thinking about that. See, everybody thinks the ledge is just, that's it. Once we get in, we're popular, it's all about getting in. What do you do on week 1? Now, Caroline can tell you the stories. So before the election, we had a meeting to draft a piece of model legislation on stopping spraying. Saying, look, we've been at this now for 40 years, we're in touch with the experts in the field, come down, sit with us, roll up our sleeves, and let's draft it. People come in, made some political statements on all sides of the parties, and then they made a run for it. Legislation gets this. Greens put forward their motion, which is never going to pass because it's not very well drafted.